Hello, everyone, and welcome to part two of our US Summer Learning Series entitled After the Party Tricks, Using AI for Real Work. Before we get into our session and introduce our speaker, I'm just going to cover a few housekeeping items. During the session, please feel free to add any questions you have into the Q&A box. We will have some time at the end to answer questions, and if we don't get to your question, we'll definitely follow up with you afterward. Immediately following this session, we will be sharing the full session recording for you to watch on demand and share back with your teams and organization. And without further ado, let's welcome our speaker of today's session, Chris Robson. And Chris, in his role as Senior Director of Data Science at Humanate, his responsibility is to help to grow Humanate's data science capabilities and expanding the breadth and depth of our advanced insights offerings to clients. And on a personal note, I've had a chance to work with Chris a little bit on some of the foundational work that he's been doing on AI, and he's super knowledgeable and also incredibly passionate about this topic. So I'm sure we'll all get a lot out of our session today. And so with that, Chris, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Greg, and welcome everybody. And just before I get started, I just want to say I'm going to be going through this material very quickly, and some of it probably would do with a little bit deeper follow-up. So if you want to reach out to me afterwards, do feel free to do so, and we can go deeper into any of these. But basically what I'm going to be talking about today is how we get beyond the initial excitement and the initial fun of the ChatGPT type experience, where probably all of you have had a go at using it and got it to talk like a pirate and write emails to your boss and things like that. And then you say, this is really powerful, but how do I use it for real work? And if any of you have been doing that, you'll probably have found quite quickly that there are some issues and there are some things that you need to go a little bit deeper on. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today. So how did we get here? About 2 years ago, those of you who know me, I've been working in the industry for a long time. I was a consultant for a long time, in fact, a consultant to Humanate, and before I joined. And one of the things that I presented just over 2 years ago is this why language transformer models will transform the insights industry. And this is kind of my I told you so or I warned you slide, in the sense that these techniques, these capabilities have been around for a few years, but it was really just last November that people suddenly realized, wow, these things can really change things. And now we've got to the stage, and I've just put up one example here, where within the industry, within Insights, the whole industry is saying, hey, how do we deal with AI? And all of a sudden, people have become aware. And the reason that people became aware is when ChatGPT was released back in November, all of a sudden it was highly accessible. Before that, it was only geeks like me who had access to the techniques. And then all of a sudden, when ChatGPT came along, people found that they could actually get online, get into the system, and got really excited about it. And so immediately people started trying to use it for things. And we saw the news messages, every news article, every news item over the last 8-9 months has been about, hey, I've written a blog using AI, or people have faked this, or whatever it is. And some of these things have been good, and some of these things have been really not so good, in fact, quite problematic. And so I would say we're in this phase at the moment where people are trying to understand, where does this fit in? How do we use this? How do we use the power of it without getting caught into some of the pitfalls? And here at Humanate, we've got this approach that we like to think about, where it's not about AI replacing everything. It's about AI supercharging us as humans. We are still human. We just now have far, far better tools. And one of the things you'll hear us say is AI won't replace you. A person using AI will. And that's something I believe really quite strongly. And this is why for all of us, whatever we're doing, whatever field we're in, we can't ignore AI, because it's not that we're going to be replaced by AI, but somebody, some competitor, some co-worker using AI will actually move faster than we can. And that's why it's really important for all of us to understand better how we use this and how we use it in the real world. Now, one of the things that I found since last November when ChatGPT came along, one of the things that happened is that ChatGPT almost became synonymous with generative AI. And you'll see this in news articles and in conference presentations and things, where people use the term ChatGPT to actually mean generative AI. And that is my first warning to you. They are not the same thing. Think of ChatGPT as the demo version of the underlying OpenAI system, okay? It really is just the demo version. You are not going to get ahead of other people, of your competitors, just by using ChatGPT, because that's the accessible version. That's what everybody can use. And the question is, what can you do within your business using these techniques? And you've probably gone through brainstorming sessions and things like that. You may even have asked ChatGPT itself, how can I use this? And there are many, many things that we can use these techniques for. But once you start to try to use them, and many of you have probably already found this, once you do it, you will start coming up against roadblocks. And what I'm going to do in this talk today is I'm going to go through 3 of the first problems you're going to encounter, okay? And if you've started down this path yourself, you will already probably have seen these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 3 of the first problems you will encounter. There are others, but I'm going to go through these 3, and I'm going to give you possible solutions that you, your company, you and your partners may be able to use to actually work through them. So here they are. And if you started using the systems, you will probably already have come across these. The first is the issue of confidentiality and privacy. And this is a really important one. The public interfaces such as ChatGPT, and there are others, okay, the things that are popping up all over the place, use our AI model to do such and such, are not necessarily secure and not necessarily respecting your data, okay? And it's really important that you understand that and you understand how the data is being used. The second problem is the length of real documents. One of the things you've probably done is you've thought, oh, ChatGPT is cool. I can put in an IDI or put in a discussion or whatever, put in the results from XYZ or this paper, and let's see what it tells us about it. And immediately it comes back and says, sorry, you're out of tokens. All these models have a fixed length of what we call tokens, basically and effectively a word length, which they can't do anything if you give it more than that. And that is a fixed limit of each of the models. And you will very quickly come up against that limit. And then the final issue that you'll come across, or not the final, the final of the 3, there are many others, but is the issue of hallucinations and limited training data. This is an interesting one. Most people don't realize that the current commonly used models had training data that ended at the end of 2021. That means they're trained on 2-year-old data. So people who are saying, oh, I'm going to use it for stock picks, or I'm going to use it to find out the latest trends amongst youth. Well, guess what? It has no clue, okay? And not only that, but the other part of it is not only is the training data in the current models limited in time, but also these things were not trained to be correct. They were trained to be plausible. And by that, it meant that if you asked a question, it gives you a great answer, but it may be completely false. And you have to be really careful how you use the output of some of these. And again, we'll talk about ways we can work with that. And there are solutions to all of these, but just as a sneak preview, you're going to have to go beyond just using the public interfaces like ChatGPT if you want to move beyond these three issues. So let's talk about confidentiality and privacy first. And this is a really important one, okay? And you'll notice the little pink bubble on the side. Be sure you have company policies on use in place. And this is really important. You should have policies on use. One of the things we're very strong on, we are encouraging our use of these, but within very strict guardrails. You need to make sure that you are not putting you, your clients, your customers' data at risk when you use these systems. And the way to really understand how to work with these is to understand better what is ChatGPT, how does it work? And the thing you have to understand is the model, the language model, the guts, the brains, if you like, of the model is this. Typically GPT 3.5 is what's mostly used, or GPT-4, the more modern one. But basically, that is accessed through an API, and ChatGPT is the user interface onto the front of that. And that's the public interface. That's the one that if you go there, you will be using. The ChatGPT interface should not be considered secure for confidential information. If you're doing so, you're probably breaking some issues with your clients, with your customers, in terms of their confidential information. So you should not be putting confidential information into there. The second point I mentioned here, just very quickly, is currently people say, well, I'll host the model locally. I'll just have it all on my servers. Currently, the ones that we can host locally are not at the power of the commercially hosted systems like OpenAI. However, that is changing. When I wrote this slide about a month ago, this was totally true. It's not as true now, and probably in 6 months' time, it won't be true anymore. But basically today, we need to use the, if we want to get the power of this, we will probably be using the APIs. Now, the thing is when you use a company's API, you sign up to terms and conditions, which are a lot clearer. And what you have to be doing is looking at your MSAs, looking at how you're working with internally with your security and standards departments, and look and say, what API can I be using? And you'll find that if you use the APIs, they're a lot clearer. So the main way to get beyond this confidentiality and privacy is to basically get rid of the ChatGPT interface and go directly to using the API. And so, for example, one of the things we've done, and this is the approach that some other companies are taking as well, is to basically completely host the interface ourselves internally. We're using APIs where we have agreements with the provider, which around data privacy, data policy. As a global company, we have to make sure we're GDPR compliant and things like that. So we've gone through all that process of compliance to make sure that we can offer internally to our own researchers the ability to use these capabilities safely and without leaking any of our clients' data, and to maintain our compliance with our own customers, our own partners, MSAs, and security needs. So like I say, one of the ways around this first problem is to go straight to the API, work with your departments to say, hey, what's an API that we can use where we have that level of commitment and trust with the partner? So that's one way you can do it. And this, you'll see here, we call this the Square AI Research Assistant. This is something that our internal people have access to, so they don't have to use the publicly available interfaces. So that was problem one, and I'm going very fast, and I apologize that I'm having to get through this, but one of the things I really want to do is just do this, tell you how we try to work through this, and we can talk deeper maybe offline later. Do feel free to reach out. The second problem is the length of real documents. And like I say, the models have a particular size. And what we have to do is, if we're going to use the models to analyze larger documents or collections of documents, we have to put in place some workflow. And there are a number of tools out there that help us with the workflow. One of the ones that we use is called LangChain. It's something that you can use as well. It's a way of working with these tools such that we can build workflows, not just simple chats, but actually workflows. What do I have to do? What are the steps I have to go through? And so, for instance, if we take something like IDIs, and if you run in-depth interviews either as on the client side or on the vendor side, on either side, you will have probably tons and tons of documents which are transcripts from in-depth interviews. And getting transcripts is easier than ever now. And typically, we're working from those transcripts and we're saying, how do we get to the next step? Because any of you who've had to read through transcripts will know this can be a couple of days and usually a couple of evenings work just to go through a number of transcripts from in-depth interviews. And these can get quite big. So the example here is real. On the left, we have transcripts of 20 IDIs where people were working through and being asked about their use of social media. And these transcripts, they wander all over the place. People talk about their dogs, people do all those kind of things. And what we have to do is we have to say, how do we take that and how do we put it into a more digestible form? And so we've built a system internally where we can take those, we put it through the LangChain workflow and come out from there and produce an interim report. Now, I say an interim report. One of our rules internally is that we don't pass AI output directly to our clients. So the way we use this is that this becomes part of the storytelling meeting, that this is the pre-read, if you like, for the storytelling, where we take the report on those IDIs and it's already summarized. In fact, what we do is we have it summarized at different levels of granularity. So we have the one sentence version, we have the paragraph version, and then we have the multi-page version, which are different summaries of the IDIs. And we also have the overall, what were the main themes? What were the main things that people were talking about? Where were the commonalities? Where were the differences between people? So you can see that this takes hours and hours, possibly days of work out of the process. If you've got a team of people who are having to absorb these interviews, we can actually move a lot quicker to the point where we can start providing insights. And again, if you think about the notion of the supercharged human, this is where we're using the AI to supercharge the human. We're taking away the grunt work, well, the very important work of reading and summarizing the IDIs and getting us closer and faster to the point where we can be providing real insights from the output. And so, yes, so as I say, yes, then bring in the humans. This is, as we say, we don't just dump output onto clients. That would be well, it wouldn't help anybody. But the important thing is our humans, the researchers and specialists working on the projects can then use this and produce the story from that. So let's finally, the third one I have, and I'm going to apologize again. I'm going to be going through this very quickly, so do bear with me. Basically, there's a whole idea of hallucinations and limited training data. There are a number of ways to work with this. Basically, the underlying thing is to supply your own data. Once you've got past the confidentiality security hurdles, you can start saying, let's bring our own data in. Rather than asking the AI system, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? We say, here's our data. What does our data tell us about X, Y, and Z? And that shift in perspective is really important. Okay, so this idea that instead we're bringing the data to the system and then we're performing queries against the data. So, and there are a number of other things we can do to bring it up to date as well. And then you'll see there's notions of plugins and agents. And typically the way to work with these is to use a combination of these, supplying your own data, using plugins, using agents to do this. So I'm going to give you an example of using an agent, and this is kind of fun. Just one thing to mention. One of the things I'm not talking about here is the whole idea of representation, diversity, and potential bias. Massively important. Again, this is where supplying your own data can help, because we can control whether there are biases, whether it's appropriately representative as we actually provide our own data. But that is a very important subject, obviously. So let's have a look at up to the moment reasoning. If I wanted to ask, for instance, ChatGPT, what movie is currently top of the US box office? What was its US weekend gross figure? And how much does that work out to be for each person in the USA? A reasonable question, a simple one, but a reasonable question. If you type that into ChatGPT, it will come back with the dreaded, I apologize, but as an AI language model. Okay, and it says, my training only goes up to September 2021, can't tell you. Now, obviously, that's not what we want. What we want is to be able to run a workflow, a chain that says that where the output is, and this, by the way, I ran this a month ago, so it's obviously it would say different today. But when I ran it a month ago, and this is real, it came back with our workflow came back, the agent came back with the current top movie in the US is Indiana Jones. Weekend gross 60 million, that's 18 cents for each person. Now, if you've used ChatGPT, you'll know it can't get anywhere close to this kind of response and reasoning and thinking. And to do that, and by the way, all this is real. This is not made up. This is, I'm showing you the exact verbatims from the system. So, if you use a chat system today, it's just going to say, nope, can't do that. Whereas if you use an agent and you set the agent up appropriately, you'll get this. What the agent does, the AI agent, it says, rather than answer the question, the first thing it does is say, how do I get to an answer? In order to get to an answer, I have to search for the current top movie using a search tool, get the weekend gross, and use a calculator to divide the gross by the population of the US. Don't get ChatGPT to do math. It cannot do math. It's rubbish at it. So what we have to do is we have to give the agent a search tool and a calculator, which is exactly what we do. And then this is what you actually get. And this is the verbatim output in verbose mode from running this agent. Well, you'll see what it does is it has thoughts. I need to find out what the current top movie is. Okay, I need to find out what the gross for that movie is. I need to use a calculator to divide it by the population of the United States, and then I'm going to give the final answer. So obviously there's a lot more to this, but just to show you that you can actually do this kind of thing using these systems. So I ran through that very quickly, but what are the real takeaways from this? You can use generative AI for real work, and we are using it on a daily basis. And you should be, or you should be working with partners who are, because these are really going to drive the next generation of insights tools. Okay. There are some issues. If you're just using the publicly available tech tools, such as ChatGPT, they're extremely limited. They may be insecure. You're not going to get ahead of your competitors. You're not going to be one of those companies that really defines the next part of your industry, if that's all you're doing. Okay, so but basically, to realize the power of these, you have to think in terms of workflow. You have to say, not how do I chat with something and get this? You have to say, what's the workflow I have to put in place? And where in that workflow do I use these generative AI techniques? And that's the approach that you need to take to get beyond the party tricks. And you'll notice again the little pink bubble. Be sure you've got company policies on use in place. That is step 0. If you don't have those, that's what you need to go and do now immediately after this. So just my final thoughts. One of the things I would say is that you should be embracing AI. Yes, there are a lot of issues with it in terms of you can't just use it naively. You have to be using it appropriately. But as we say, AI will not replace you, but a person using AI will, or a company, your competitor using AI will. You should be experimenting in a safe place. Do think of the data diversity. I haven't gone into that in depth in this, but that is a really important part. And finally, this focus on workflows. Supercharge your projects by thinking about the workflow, not just can I ask a chat bot what it is, but say, how do I build a workflow that does this fundamental thing that is going to revolutionize my business? So apologies, I ran through that very fast, but now if you've got any questions, I'd like to hand it over to Greg to tell us what we have.
Thanks, Chris. That was definitely great. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in our chat box here. We probably have time for maybe 1 or so questions. So I do have a couple that have come in. First one here is, there's a lot of talk about bias in these models. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and this is basically, you've got to remember that the core models that we're using here were trained on the internet. They were trained to be plausible. What would be plausible given what people do on the internet? Now, a lot of the internet is great. We've got the Wikipedias and all the stuff. It's got all that. However, it's also got a lot of it was trained on Reddit. And if you've ever been to Reddit, you'll know exactly what that's like. So there is intrinsic bias in the models, and you have to be aware of that. That's where bringing your own data in makes it so important, makes it so much better, because basically you can work with your data that you have collected or that you have curated in a way that that you've accounted for bias. There are also ways in the way that you use prompts and things like that to make sure you're avoiding bias. However, the very best way is to bring unbiased data to it and not ask it what it thinks, but ask it what it understands from the data that you're giving it. So that I would say, it's a very important issue at the moment. I mean, it's an important issue in insights generally, but that's definitely an important part of how we use these systems.
Makes sense. We are up against our time, so we'll follow up directly with those who posted questions. But I guess just to wrap things up, that concludes part 2 of our summer learning series. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Again, feel free to follow up with Chris directly if you have questions afterward. And also, in order to create better experience for future sessions, we'd love to hear from you. So you can click on the pop-up on your screen now to just take a quick 2-minute survey, or click the link in the follow-up email with the on-demand recording. And with that, we look forward to next week's session, which is entitled Shaping Better Futures, Bringing the Value of Cultural Context to Insights. So if you haven't registered, feel free to do that, and hopefully we'll see you then. And thank you again for your time, and have a great rest of your day.